December 1855. The war in the Crimea was no longer fought with cannon fire, but with ice, hunger, and silence. The guns had stopped echoing over Sebastopol, yet death remained, creeping through tents, freezing men where they slept, turning victory into frost. While the Allies shivered on the hills of the Black Sea deep inside Russia, the Empire itself began to crack. And now the letter begins. Camp Sebastopol, December 22nd, 1855. Never since the occupation of the Crimea by the Allies had they endured such a winter. The gales and torrents of rain, the snow and frost that followed, were harsher and longer than any known before. On the 18th, a violent storm from the northwest swept over the hills for 24 hours, covering the earth with more than a foot of snow. Then came an even crueler wind from the north and east. A wind so fierce it seemed to cut through the world itself. The snow, swirling in great white wreaths, forced its way into every crevice and crack of the wooden huts. It entered even the best-sealed tents, freezing everything it touched. Beer, wine, spirits, even tea, moments after leaving the pot, turned solid in a blink. Every coat and blanket was thrown on in desperation, but warmth could not be found. As the night deepened, the mercury in the thermometer fell until it disappeared into the bulb. Some sentries on the heights were found frozen to death at their posts. Others, frostbitten beyond saving, were carried to the hospital. In the 30th Regiment, a private was discovered dead in his bed. The sergeant major beside him had lost one ear to the cold. Even the laughter of the camp fell silent. Where men once built snow giants or threw snowballs, now only shivering shadows stood beside their rifles. At sea the wind was no kinder. Ships could not approach the harbour, and great anxiety spread over the missing French mailboats. None had arrived since the 14th. At Balaclava, soldiers from unhutted regiments were ordered daily to fetch timber for shelters. They dragged planks and beams on foot through the frozen valleys, because more than 1,000 horses and mules had already perished in the cold. The Turkish and Armenian labourers, housed in thin, ragged tents, were dying daily, victims of delay and neglect. The French camps in the valley of the Chernaya fared only slightly better. Their air was a few degrees milder than the British heights above Sebastopol. Yet there too, the suffering was deep. In Paris, it had been imagined that the fall of the city would end the need for huts or tents. The men learned, too late, that the enemy now was winter itself. Camp life in frost. The unnatural cold stopped almost every amusement in camp. Dog hunts, once common, were abandoned. Even the wild hounds would not run. The animals lying among the rocks looked back at their pursuers, with eyes of pity, as if appealing for mercy. Ashamed, the officers gave up the sport. In their boredom, they invented new games. 2 or 3 riders set off, scattering trails of paper shavings across the snow. 20 minutes later, dozens of others galloped after them in a great chase called Follow My Leader. Near the monastery of St. George, 17 men fell into a half-frozen brook before General Eyre rode through victorious, cheered by his comrades. General Barnard amused himself with sleighing, though the roads were far too rough for joy. Meanwhile, the engineers tested a new invention, a massive artillery carriage with beams that pivoted around the wheels, transforming it into a sled when the ground turned to ice. The contraption worked. The gun slid forward where wheels would sink. In the frozen city below, preparations were underway for the destruction of the great Russian naval docks. Weeks of rain had filled the mines with water, but the frost now made the work easier. Soon, said the correspondent, we shall witness the destruction of the most compact and well-built naval docks ever constructed. Though strong and numerous, the docks were small, unfit for the giant warships of the age. Sir Edmund Lyons, commanding the Royal Albert, had sailed for Malta, taking with him General Della Marmora, chief of the Sardinian forces. Both were bound for Paris to attend the Great Council of War, where the fate of the Crimea, and perhaps of Russia, would be decided inside the Russian Empire. While the Allies froze in their camps, the Russian Empire itself was trembling. Reports from St. Petersburg spoke of unrest among the Muslim population along the Volga. Many had been arrested, entire families sent into exile in Siberia. In the far north, Finland was restless. The government refused to let Finnish families cross into Sweden for the winter, fearing rebellion or escape. At Kiev, Emperor Alexander II had ordered a special military court to try captured Poles and Hungarians, relics of Europe's failed revolutions. The Poles would be punished under Russian military law, the Hungarians handed back to Austria. Economic collapse followed close behind. The price of saltpeter, the key ingredient in gunpowder, had risen beyond all calculation. The government abolished restrictions, offering high cash prices for anyone who could produce it, a desperate move for an army running out of ammunition. Finances were in chaos. Despite heavy surveillance at the borders, gold and silver were being smuggled out of the empire in vast quantities. Smugglers earned 4% from both ends, the exporter inside Russia and the receiver abroad. What began as the small contraband of tea had become a full-fledged trade in coin and currency. An entire underground population lived from it. The empire, vast and cold with Berlin, was bleeding quietly from within. From Sebastopol to St. Petersburg, the winter of 1855 turned victory into ruin. The soldiers froze in their huts, the empire froze in its pride. When the guns fell silent, it was not peace that followed, but the sound of cracking ice, another truth revealed by the Black Folder.